India is doing something pretty extraordinary. It's taking a rulebook that's over 100 years old and essentially tearing it up to completely overhaul its prison system. And we're not talking about a few minor updates here. This is a massive shift away from an old-school colonial idea of punishment towards a future of rehabilitation. So what on earth is driving such a huge change?
Right. Let's get straight to it. Why now? After 129 years, what's happening behind prison walls that's forced India to completely rethink its entire approach to justice? Well, that is the big question at the heart of this whole story.
You know, the spark that really lit this fire? It was data. A recent report from the National Crime Records Bureau basically pulled back the curtain on the state of India's prisons, and the numbers it revealed are pretty much impossible to ignore.
To really get why this overhaul is so critical, we kind of have to go back in time. We need to dig into the foundations of the system, which, believe it or not, were laid down in a totally different era, under British colonial rule.
So here's the basic setup. In India, prisons are a state responsibility. Now, while the central government can offer guidance and funds, it's ultimately each state that runs its own jails. And as you can imagine, this creates this kind of patchwork of different standards and practices all across the country.
This timeline really gets to the heart of the issue. The main law governing prisons was the Prison Act of 1894, a law from the time of the British Raj, and that was the guiding document all the way until 2023. Just think about that, a 129-year gap. It's basically a relic of a colonial past trying to operate in modern India.
And this slide shows a total 180 in philosophy. The old 1894 Act was really about one thing: containment, just locking people up and keeping them there. The new Model Act flips that completely on its head. The focus now is all on correction and rehabilitation, rethinking the entire purpose of a prison. But look, this pressure for change wasn't just coming from statistics or government reports. For decades, India's courts have been a major force for change, really pushing for reform from inside the legal system itself. Time and time again, India's Supreme Court has had to step in, reminding everyone that even when you're behind bars, you're still a citizen with fundamental rights. This judicial oversight has been a really crucial check on the whole prison system.
Okay, so one of the really interesting ideas championed by the courts is the open prison. Just try to picture it, a facility with very little security, where inmates actually work and live without being locked in cells 24/7. It's a pretty radical model aimed at building trust and actually preparing people for life on the outside.
And just this year, the Supreme Court took it even further. They came right out and said that open prisons are a direct solution to overcrowding, which is one of the system's biggest, most chronic problems. I mean, that's a seriously powerful mandate for change.
And this kind of judicial activism isn't new at all. You can see a long history of it. Back in 1979, a landmark case established the right to a speedy trial and ended up freeing thousands of people. And more recently, another ruling forced the government to tackle caste discrimination inside prison walls.
So you've got this damning data on one side and decades of pressure from the courts on the other. In response, the government has finally unveiled its new blueprint to drag the prison system into the 21st century. At the very heart of this reform is the new Model Prisons Act of 2023. The best way to think about it is as a national template, a guiding document from the Ministry of Home Affairs that all the states can now use to update their own, often ancient laws.
This new act is really comprehensive. It doesn't just scrap that old 1894 law. It actually pulls together and modernizes several different old pieces of legislation. The big goal here is to create a much more consistent, uniform standard for how prisons are run across all of India. Okay, so a new law is great on paper, right? But it's only as good as its implementation. So let's take a look at the actual practical reforms that are being rolled out to turn this new vision into a reality. The government is really tackling this from a bunch of different angles. We're seeing everything from financial aid for poor prisoners, to a huge push for digitization, to major security upgrades, and even new systems to make the whole justice process way faster.
Let's break these down a bit. There's financial aid for people who are stuck in jail simply because they can't afford bail. The ePrison project is creating a national database of inmates, which improves tracking so people don't just get lost in the system. New tech is being brought in to modernize security. And then there's the EFASTR system, which sends court orders electronically, so a bail order can reach a prison in minutes instead of days.
So, when you connect all these dots, the new law, the court rulings, all this new technology, a really clear picture starts to emerge. This is a deliberate, fundamental shift away from an agenda of just punishment and towards one that's focused on reform and giving people a second chance.
The plan is definitely ambitious, and the technology is rolling out as we speak. The scale of this whole transformation is just massive. But the ultimate question, the one that really matters, is this. Will all these changes on paper actually translate to a new, more humane reality for the hundreds of thousands of people living inside India's prisons? That is the real test.